Hey, what's up, everybody? You're listening to Cyberpunk Uncensored, and I am Rob Mulligan. Today, I have with me Eric and Phil. What's up, guys?
Hey, doing well.
Hey man, how's it going?
Good, good. So, yeah, anybody listening, you probably know Eric and Phil from numerous episodes of this podcast, also from the Cyberpunk Uncensored group on Facebook, and good friends, and also Eric plays Coupler on the weekly Cyberpunk Red campaign that we stream live on the Mulligan Live YouTube channel. But yeah, let's get into today's episode. We wanted to talk about cyberpunk environments. So just as a GM, how we envision and create and describe to the players, and also vice versa, how players have contributed to that, but just all the different types of environments that we've played and GM'd with when it comes to Cyberpunk. And that includes, from 2020 up through Red, and then anticipating the 2077 environments that we've seen, whether it be in, gameplay previews and promos, or from the Dark Horse World art book. So let's get into it, guys. Where do you guys want to start? I say we start kind of probably generally in 2020. Maybe let's go over that stuff. What do you guys think?
That's
Well,
that's a
I
good
think we
place
should
to
probably
start.
start on just the idea of like what is a cyberpunk environment, because I think it goes all the way back to just that Blade Runner when you sort of first see that panning shot. It's like that became what the sprawl was before sprawl even was a thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, to me, I think now it's just there's so many different environments within the world of cyberpunk, let alone just even in Night City, you know. But you're right. I mean, there is kind of this general like genre of cyberpunk, I guess, is what you're referring to, rather than environments. But like the genre that kind of you feel from that particular environment that's showcased in that film is definitely that dystopian dark future, cybernetic, high tech, low life. I mean, that was the key phrase that kind of started it all, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's the general vibe, and probably the overall blanketing environment that all the subcategories and details fall under. So that kind of makes sense. But yeah, describe it yourself. How do you kind of picture that when speaking of the general? Let's not
Well,
get
in the
into
general, it's
specifics.
that thing of like you sort of have this humanity that's just like the combination of industrial and humanity just sort of thrust all into one very sort of small area, and it just sort of keeps bleeding, but you don't really ever feel that dispersion. It's always sort of people cramped. You get that almost like post-industrial London where the clouds are like sort of just black smoke and soot, and just everybody is sort
Yeah,
of perpetually angry.
I know.
It
I
just
love.
it sort of has that vibe of like no matter what you do, you're never sort of getting into a place where you can feel clean almost.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I love, without getting into red too much, how that even pushed that more, you know? But that just that the dirtiness. But I love how you said cramped, because it
Yeah.
totally has that feeling, like that dark dystopian, like overpopulation. I mean, cuz like face it, the birth rate outweighs the death rate, and it's going to take a lot of huge natural catastrophes and things that happen to wipe out the population and rebalance that. But we're heading towards cyberpunk, if not the
We're
movie,
already
if
there in a
not
way.
if not the movie Idiocracy. I hate to say it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But regardless, it definitely, yeah, cramped. It totally feels overpopulated, and like all the buildings are stacked on top of each other, and like it's just filthy, overpopulated.
Well, remember in the history, the collapse happened and many people died. There was actually less people in the country, but they all gravitated to the cities, to the city centers.
That's true.
Humanity seeks out itself. So when you go, you've got
These
all these
concentration
people.
points, so to speak, like wherever it's all
Cor-
concentrated. And
Correct.
then all this wasteland where there's like random, neo tribes, so to speak, all these like nomads, prior to Red when they're running transportation fully. But yeah,
Right.
Yeah. I think that's
You
just
get
sort of a human ideal of when sort of societies on the brink of collapse, they just sort of flood those city central kind of points, and then you have the other side of like then you have barren wastelands like you're saying. And I think Night City did a really good job of that, of sort of being in that in between area.
oh yeah,
And
no,
that's just for
like
2020.
that's what I love about Night City, is it has all separate environment vibes, and anything you can picture, like there's a section of the city like that, or beyond the combat zone or within other districts around it. But then totally beyond that, I love how the whole wasteland vibe, it takes you from that high tech low life to almost like post-apocalyptic vibe, or like Mad Max meets The Hills Have Eyes, if you want, like like you get out to the wastelands, and I feel like it's spread out, and it can get, I don't know, post-apocalyptic. You know what I mean?
Right,
Versus the high
because
tech.
those people out there are strictly in survival mode.
Right.
They've chosen not to come to the cities, instead choosing to stay where they are. And staying where they are means famine and disease, but it also means, hey, I'm going to have to survive the best way I can. And if that means eating you, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
picture like as far as the environments of that, it's totally like you said, like very barren and cutthroat, and like there's obviously very little civilization, but because of the way the environments have been, all the wastelands are just that, waste, unless you come across like, a biotechnica field or a crop field or Savoil doing some weird, you'll come
Right.
across some weird Greenland section, but it's always like fenced off and high security, or like in a bubble or some shit. You know what I mean? That's how I always picture those
Right, right.
environments.
Because they
yeah,
say as the environment changed, what was the Greenlands here in the US moved north closer to Canada. So the green belt that we used to have is now the brown belt, and the green belt, because of the environmental changes, went north.
Yeah.
yeah. And just in with the 2020 rules and moving in the red, we get a lot of good environments of like they start talking about what's going on in the South Americas and stuff like that. Like, because that was a huge part of what actually led up to red, the South America wars and the pretty much the viruses that were destroying the crops and well the drug crops and a lot of the deforestation. It's like that was one of the key points that they made about that.
Yeah.
So, and I think that opens up a lot of campaign ideas for like some of the biotechnical corporations that were using these new like jungles and trying to find new drugs or other kind of chemicals. It's like I think that opens up a lot of options for where you want to take your setting other than the cramped sort of sprawl-like environment.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can, like Phil said, take it up to the new green belt, keep it in like the more desert, desolate wasteland sort of brown belt, if you will, or, go South America and change it up. Just like there's still overseas stuff. But as we know, going into red, things are way different. So, like, let's get into Night City, the different environments, and, you know, just how rich the environments are with that filth and all that. And then obviously with post fourth corporate war and the nuke, and all the nuclear fallout for decades, and the red skies and all that shit, like, it's all those same environments, but now with like this red filthy hue, and the rains that just have the toxic sludge in it, and wash off stations like before, cramped and pissed off people, but now they're wet and even more filthy and pissed off. But let's dive into these different environments. I mean, let's start like the corporate areas and the nice shit.
Yeah, well, the corporate area is like just sort of the pinnacle of what Night City is. I mean, people, when players are thrown into it, like
Yeah.
you have everything there, even though players really aren't even allowed to be there because they'd be arrested. And
Right. No, edge runners, I mean, or at least questioned heavily if they have armor and weapons and shit like that. But yeah, I picture
Yeah.
like the corporate zones or whatever, that sort of area being cyberpunk, obviously the nicest areas, but on the verge of like sci-fi. Like when you picture corporate areas, you're picturing like huge skyscrapers and AVs flying around them, and like, people dressed fucking high class and like futuristic looking, like shit that you might see now, like on the runway. You'd be like, who would ever wear that? You know what I mean? Like it's almost on the
Exactly.
verge of like the sci-fi feel of within cyberpunk. That's how I always picture the corporate zone. Like
And
super
with my in
wealthy.
my corporate zone, I have all these connecting bridges. They're
Yeah.
too good to come down to street level. So your AV pads are up on the roof. Your bridges are above the street. You can look down on them, literally look down on the populace, and not have to be among them.
Yeah, I love that.
yeah, I think the corporate zone sort of has that it sets the pristine mentality of like you won't find grime and dirt, and I think that's sort of what you look at the art in just some of the 2020 books. you can see that edge in. Like they'll show those pristine settings, but you also have those edge runners sort of creeping in on the edge of there.
Oh
Like
yeah.
they'll talk about the gangs that are like sort of roaming, but you don't ever really see them.
Yeah, I
And
know.
so it has
And
this
think of
sort
how
of
many,
false
you know,
facade upon it.
exactly. And think of how many like solos, work for corporations and fixers do business with corps in there. And like, there's edge runners coming and going in the corp zone, but it's a little more toned down. They're not walking in fully armed up and all that sort of shit unless they expect to get questioned by local authority or something. But
Hmm.
or maybe not being allowed into some of the buildings unless they've got an appointment or something particular.
Yeah, the
But
corporate zone sort of gets that. It feels like Disneyland, like or Disney
yeah.
World, where everything looks so perfect, but underneath you have like all the trash system, everything's going on this underground ton of tunnels. It's
Oh,
like
oh,
people are sort of taken away into the back rooms before anything can happen.
yeah, it feels like future, Tomorrowland or Future Zone or whatever the fuck of Disney, but yeah, it's still cyberpunk. You still know the
Right.
corporations are shady and slimy and shit's going on. Somebody's probably getting tortured in a back room or something. You know what I mean? It's still cyberpunk.
And in that vein, you still live in that world, and there's still the smog because, of course, with the collapse, the EPA probably went to shit. We can just do whatever we want now. The EPA is gone, so you still have those days where you have to wear a breathing mask to go outside. It doesn't have to be a full-on environmental suit, just a little something to keep your lungs clean.
Yeah.
And I often use that. It's like, hey, we have a red air quality day, and my players then have to strap on breathing masks just to not cough all day long.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I've
there'd be
done
nothing
something
worse than a
similar.
spell
In,
check and you're coughing.
yeah, I've done something similar in a previous game where in the rain, and it's a acid toxic rain when they were in Neo Angeles when we were first playing, and they all had to wear their slicks and worry about touching things without gloves and shit like that. But I also want to add like corporate zone like very, very always seems prestigious and sci-fi on the verge of that, but definitely pollution, definitely cyberpunk things are happening, but it is that higher class area. But going into red, let's add the touch of flavor there, which is a reconstruction of everything. So I picture it all, still big city shit. Life is back in the city, but there's a lot of new construction still going on. That skyscrapers are still being added on and connected, and it's just, and don't forget about the weather and the red skies. So it's just still grimy, but this area is still trying to be, I don't know, nicer than the other areas, even though it's in that shit weather and post nuke fallout. That's how I picture the corp zone in
Yeah,
red.
yeah, because they're going to be, like you said, in constant construction and also in constant cleaning. You're going to have your drones, whether it be aerial or ground based, who's always scrubbing the streets, always scrubbing the pathways, like constantly, because this red rain is, well, rain, it falls
Yeah.
periodically.
Oh yeah, it's creating sludge. Going into
Yeah.
all these shops and buildings now in red. You have to go through these wash offs and stuff before you enter. So it's like I said, like as if Cyberpunk couldn't be more dark and fucked up and everybody pissed off and it's just being dangerous. Now everyone's like wet and filthy and pissed off. So like it's even more. But but yeah, let's get out of the corporate zone and let's talk about the rest of the city. And it's funny because unless to me anyways, like it's almost like you have the high class and the low class, and then you step into the combat zone. When it comes to classes and stuff in Cyberpunk, there's very little in between or easy life or middle road. And
Well,
even
I
though,
think it's
but then there's all these
there. I think
individual.
it's just far
But let me finish what
removed.
I'm saying though. I feel like in these sections though, there's individual environments that help sculpt that sort of level, but there's not necessarily like a getting out of it unless you're getting into the corporate zone, which is like the ultimate powers of the world of cyberpunk, really. But what were we saying?
Yeah.
Right. The line that divides the corporates from the combat zoners is like a pencil line. It's there, but it's super thin. And that's where I guess most of the edge runners exist. They're not eating dirt for breakfast, but they're also not eating real meat either.
Right, and
They're
they're
right
hustling. They're not
directly
working.
within them.
They're not working a 9 to 5 and stuff. Everybody working normal jobs. I picture are hard up. You know what I mean? It's like no longer can you just survive running a fucking shop or working at the mall or whatever. You know what I mean? Like everyone's hard up, everyone's booster ganging or doing something on the side, or you're hustling hard like edge
Well,
runners to get by a little better than living in a coffin every day. You know what I mean?
well,
Otherwise, you got to go the corp route or go big time. You know?
well, see, Rob, I think it's a little different. I think that they don't actually talk about the middle class very often. It's like we see the low lives, we see the boosters and the edge runners, and they make up a small population. And we also see like the high class corps, and they're another small population. But like we don't really hear about the day-to-day workers, the suburbans, like all that middle class is just sort of tucked away because I think we talked about before, it's like it's just not that interesting to put your those kind of characters in that setting. It's really weird.
No,
Like
but
I've
see,
read a few books.
but I see that in the source books and like in Night City and stuff. You know, there are like the middle class mega apartment complexes and shit like that outside, like in I forget, I don't have it in front of
I
me, but
think it was
like in
like
any
Haywood.
yeah, but well, that's more industrialized, but yeah, but my point is like it's still not nice. They're in these mega complexes that remind me of those pictures of those shitty ass huge apartment buildings that you see from Hong Kong and stuff. It's
Right.
Well, yeah,
still
but even
not.
those ones
But let me
were
finish. But it's still not that middle class like white picket fence in a yard and 2.5 kids in a house and 2 cars and like that shit only exists in my mind for like corpse and stuff and. I haven't read otherwise in that. It always seems like everyone running shops and just working and stuff, they're all kind of like hard up. You know what I mean? There's nobody like with that
Yeah.
white picket fence and yard
Yeah,
house
the
shit
Leave
going
It to
on.
yeah,
Beaver, the whole Leave It to Beaver thing that as and then they
Yeah,
remember they
yeah, the
called
beavers.
those sections Beaver Bills,
Right.
after the TV show. So those are like the they're on the
Upcoming
management tier, but like
corpse.
yeah, lowest level corps. They're
Yeah.
there in their safe little Beaver Bill.
You can
They're there in their
consider
safe
that
little
middle
Beaver
class,
Bill.
I guess. Yeah.
yeah, that is the upper middle class for the most part.
Upper middle class. Yeah. Well, because
Because like I
that's always corpse specific too. So like they're always
Oh yeah,
coming up.
everybody's for some corp like those big apartment blocks you mentioned. For me, corps own some of those apartment blocks, and the people there strictly work for that corp. You are the cogs in the machine. Like if you're working for Orbital Air, and they've got these like 6 buildings here, all you guys are working for Orbital Air in some, from some fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are like drone farms. It's just an easy way to keep the population in control. And like, yeah, they're struggling, but at the same time, they don't really have a lot of freedom to do anything. Like, they're not going to
Right.
rebel against the corporations there because it keeps them fed and housed. It's like watching Dread. You see a lot of the people living in those huge multi-tower buildings, but for the most part, none of them did anything. Like when the movie was going down, they just hid in their apartments and waited things
Exactly. They're
out.
normal people. Yeah. But
Like,
and that also makes me think of this too. Like there's also like I always picture like a couple different versions of that too, where there's like this mega complex way outside on the outskirts, almost combat zone esque, but it's very like I said, like those pictures from Hong Kong where it's like ratty, fucked up, huge 6,000 people, 600 unit or whatever buildings. These huge fucking mega complexes. And then I picture huge apartment complexes in the city as well, like in certain suburbs, whether it be like Little Japantown or Little Japan. I don't know what they're calling it, or Little China. I forget what it's going to be in Red. I've seen in the book in 2077, and then obviously what it's referred to in 2020. But I picture those same type of mega complexes for some people that do live in the city, same style of shit, like same size, but a little bit nicer. You know what I mean?
oh
But
yeah.
still not middle class, but still kind of rough. Like no one's making a shitload of money or anything when they're living like that. But I do picture at least like two different kind of versions of those apartments. Like
Well, you're going to have like the different class tiers, especially when it comes to middle class, because that is a huge area
and
of
let's
like kibble to filet mignon almost.
yeah. Well, I mean. Yeah, filet mignon. I mean, you're corping if you're if you're getting real fucking meat and steaks and stuff. But
You're a corp if you even know that word.
You know what I mean? But I think like let's talk about the environment. What I like about Night City too, like when it comes to like the different districts, lower than the corp, like super nice zones or whatever, where like cops will still show up. They still give a fuck about what's going on in the city, but there are a little bit more gang activity here and there. You got shops, you got restaurants, you got this and that. But I love how there's like any city, the different sections. Like when they have the park in Japantown, and I always just picture exactly like what you would think there with the rooftops, very styled like that, and dragon designs and like neon shit, like very Asian focused,
Yeah,
and
it's
then
a cultural enclave.
Right.
yeah,
Like
and
Night City
and just like they
Park.
have Little Italy, like I picture that, like obviously a lot of Italian restaurants and like, you know what I mean, like more I don't know what you call it, but like those narrow apartment brownstone
Sort of like the
style.
brownstones.
There you go. Yeah, yeah, like the brownstone. So I love that Night City has that. Like even when you have the lower levels or whatever, the environments are at least rich with different cultures. Like they still held on to that sort of stuff, just like now, like how cities are.
Exactly,
Yeah,
because that stuff is not going to go away just because, the world turns to shit because culture progresses. I mean, people will take it with them unless, that people are completely wiped out all at once, which will never happen. So all the Italians are going to, build, little Italies, and all the Asians are going to go from Japantown or Little China or all of
yeah.
that there.
If anything, those cultural groups are going to actually become sort of more stronger and sort of actually group together more. So you're going to see more of those kind of situations because of the problems hopping up around them.
Yeah, no,
And it's
definitely.
like, but this is just Night City. Like we haven't even really looked into what's going on in the Euro books because Cyberpunk they released so many. It's like I think there
Right.
was two Euro books and just one for the UK.
No, and look at how
Yep.
they lightly poked at in the timeline with the red starter kit and some of the lore going into 2077 about post fourth corporate war, how much shit changed. So like
Yeah,
there's gonna be a lot. I think a lot of different environments when it comes to alignments of corporations and powers and subsidiaries and all these neocorps and stuff. So that's going to change. But I think the environments when it comes to like aesthetics of parts of cities, those will always kind of have this same cyberpunk vibe and then be within districts, I think. With the exception of what I love what they do when it's not culture based, when it comes to like the marina or the docks or the combat zone or shit like that, they'll have stuff like that in there where it's not necessarily a culture, but it's a complete fucking vibe. Like when I picture the docks and the way they describe it and the different things going on there, and obviously the fun we had it in the recent game, Eric, but uh, very like pirates or very gangs or just dock workers or import exports sort of shady shit could be going on or like smuggling. Like I just love the
Hmm.
aspect of it, of having like the port aspect.
yeah, that opens up a lot of different opportunities because no two ports are really alike. They can be doing the same thing, but they can function very differently. It's like I think in the 2020 Night City book, there are like two different ports of the port that have different, very different ways of operating.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think we'll see what happens in red, but we know that in 2077, just based on that art book and some of the stuff we went over in there, that there's still the marina and the docks going on, but then there's also the whole Arasaka beach or whatever, that whole
Yeah.
port that they took over. So there's some cool kind of crazy shit going on there, and then they own the part of town that's behind there pretty much, and they kind of run that with their gang or something along that line. I've been reading about. So I don't know. Like I'm really curious when full red. I mean, I know we've got the beta rules read, but it doesn't dive into a lot of the lore or the specifics. It's very, it's the rules. So that's
Just
awesome.
gotta have some patience,
Yeah,
Rob.
yeah.
He'll come.
No,
He'll
but
come.
I'm saying like we can play and we can kind of improvise a lot of the environment and stuff, and I can make stuff up. But I'm excited for when Red officially comes out and see what other source books and just kind of see exactly what is happening around the city and how it's, I don't know, explained,
And
or
that
all the
and
adjectives they use.
that'll be good for me because I love flavor. You know, I'm
Yeah,
uh I'm a big flavor guy. Like, and when you go into, like you say, Little Italy, you got the mafioso types, but they're a gang just like any other gang, but they're chill. They're laid back. They're not going to show their true face unless you do something to force them to do that. Unlike, you go on, you meet, Maelstrom, who are quite obviously a gang and will beat you down just because you look at them funny.
right.
Yeah, that's something I haven't thought of how you actually put your players to act in the different sort of environments of pretty much saying you have to go meet somebody in Little Italy or like Little Japantown. Like, are they going to be going in trying to be bosses of everybody, intimidating, or are they going to
Right.
try to play it cool?
Right.
Precisely, precisely. You have to play to your audience, I guess you'd say. I mean, as far as your PCs, hey, we're going to go into this area. We have to look like this, or we have to act like that. It's not just, hey, I'm a jerk wherever I go. No, that
No,
will get you
exactly.
shot.
No, it's ultimately up to the players to, act accordingly and to role play depending on their environment and stuff. But obviously, if they're not catching the hint of the environment, then that's where you have, rewards and repercussions. Like if somebody's going in all murder hobo or loud and obnoxious or intimidating in a situation that doesn't require it, or going in too timid and talking in an environment where people are violent, then obviously you've got to react as a GM and kind of give them some repercussions or at least some changes in the environment so they get the hint or they understand where they're at.
I
Oh,
think
yeah,
it
exactly.
I think it's a good learning experience for players and lets them sort of stretch their legs and try new things instead of just sort of thinking I just can go in and kill everybody. It's like
Yeah.
it removes that mentality of like I just there's more than one ways to skin a cat essentially.
Well, not just that, speaking of environments, like it just reinforces the fact, because it is a fact, that there's different environments and sections of the city and districts and vibes and all that shit. And that's, why we're talking about environments. And if a player or even a GM or whatever just kind of blanket environments the whole fucking city with this rowdy cyberpunk shoot 'em up vibe everywhere all the time, then it's really not what it should be.
No, they're treating it at that point like a video game instead of a living, breathing environment.
Right.
And I think some of the cyberpunk books I've read and just the movies I watched, like you can go around and like they don't just show like the sprawl. They take it from like the suburbs. You'll see the countryside. You'll see the waste. And it's like you sort of realize that the world is more than just the cramped sort of Blade Runner feeling. That's what I actually liked about the 2049 movie. You got to see a lot of different aspects of what the world was.
Yeah, I
You got
think
to see what was left of Vegas, essentially.
Yeah, I think me and you talked about that before. I think that was like the coolest part of that movie, like compared to the original or whatever. I was like, oh, like I needed more. Like it felt like a very isolation piece, if you will, even though it's totally not. But it had the feeling of like minimum locations, and it was just a very narrow story. And I wanted so much more out of it. I wanted it to feel bigger, like what I loved about when the series Altered Carbon came out, or like the original Blade Runner. But I think when you talked, like the coolest part was when he traveled out, like that scenery, because it was like, just it felt bigger, at least at that moment. Like there was just, you got to feel for like the wasteland, and there's still people out there doing shit. There's still some shit going on.
And I think
Yeah,
that's important that your players know that, hey, there's more stuff out there. Maybe we ought to go see it, or maybe we can go see it. You don't have to go, but there's more stuff out of here than corporate tower dungeon crawl.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think the corporate books too. They did a really the last two books for 2020. I think what was it, Shockwave and Stormfront. They did a really good job of like making the players branch out because they were active during a corporate war, and you could take them underwater. You can take them like across the world. They really open up a lot of different options to see the cyberpunk world before it essentially ended in there.
Yeah.
And that you can do bottle episodes like where the players are stuck in a small area. Look at Dread; they did that really well, and that was just one huge building.
Right.
Or the movie Hardware with just what, two apartment buildings,
Yeah.
and that was a
Oh, I haven't seen
really
that
good.
movie in 20 years.
Exactly, if it was a good movie though, and you remember it still. So it's like you don't need these really huge settings to tell a good cyberpunk story, but you sort of have to have the story in the world and make it feel like it has a cyberpunk world.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
No, definitely. But it also, like I said, when it came to Blade Runner and the new one, it also has to do with expectations because it is Blade Runner. But
Oh yeah, that was so many high expectations
that's
that
just
just
a
couldn't live up to it.
that's just a different, beast in itself. Like they needed to go a little bigger and broader with it. They need to show off more of like city stuff and night market and cybernetics, and they just needed a little bit more of all that juicy fucking all the bells and whistles to go along with the cool story and the wasteland and the travel and all the other deep stuff that they did, you know. But that's just my opinion, whatever. Um, but yeah, the other thing aside from like the docks, which I always love the vibe of that and how there's so many different things you can do with it, is like obviously the infamous combat zone. Like I love how the combat zone can be used for just any rowdy, rough, grimy shit that you need, and it's just like where you can go to be violent or sleazy or shady or mysterious or just anything, because it's just, you know, no police. I was about to say no authority, but there's always authority in everywhere you go. There's somebody trying to be a
Just
boss.
depends.
Yeah, yeah, but no police. You know what I mean? There's not a police presence going around, you know, protecting you, if you will.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
but you still
combat
have to
zone.
mind you still have to mind your P's and Q's because
Right.
since there are no police and the feudal lords that run it has very specific tastes on how and when you should come into their area and what you should do once there. And so you still got to mind your P's and Q's when entering the combat zone. It's not like, hey, I'm gonna be big badass. Well, these guys are ready for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the combat zone may be chaotic, but it is anything but anarchy. Like there are rules, there are gangs, and it's a big playground for those who really want just adventure and just be murder hobos essentially. But you can do just about anything in there, and that's it really is one of the things I liked. You weren't restricted. I feel like in other RPGs, you go to town, it's very prim and proper, almost like you don't have that kind of feel to adventure with a combat zone unless you're out in the wilderness. But here you have city portions that are like, yeah, no, it's actually probably worse than the wilderness.
Yeah. No, and I love, you know, describing and picturing the combat zone because it can always be anything and everything that, you know, maybe you wouldn't do in the rest of the city, where like there's like cars on fire possibly, or like a burned out building, or like people doing drugs, or somebody getting mugged on the side as you're driving by and nobody cares, or like or like we said, gangs running a part of town and you walk through and they're kind of like questioning you or staring you down, or maybe someone just takes a shot off at you or something, you know, like it could be anything. And I love the vibe of it, but it's always, you know, the environment there, the aesthetic, it's always like, um, you know, unpredictable and just somewhat chaotic in its clutter, you know, because that's where a lot of the rundown buildings are. There's no like city programs to help fix the streets and buildings out there. It's just fucked up, you know.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And you can even actually build that in the campaigns of, yeah, we're gonna rebuild the combat zone one square at a time. And like there are some good areas of the combat zone. Like they talk about guardian gangs and people who
Yeah,
are trying to do good. But
yeah, like
it's for you can play you can
the
turn that into a sandbox of
Sixth
anything you
Street
want.
Brawlers were one of them, you know.
Yeah,
And
not everybody in the
and they were,
combat zone is bad guys. Some of them have no other choice but to be there. They are left with no other option but to go to these combat zones to try to eke out some sort of a survival or living.
yeah, when we were going over gangs and had that episode just recently, we were talking about the sort of equivalent of the guardian angels of gangs in Night City, like the Sixth Street Brawlers, like they talk about that in the 2077 book and stuff. But there's a few of them, and I do kind of picture that like there could be a section in the combat zone maybe where like, you know, there's a community playground for the kids or garden or some shit they're trying to do. Obviously, it's pathetic, but you know they're trying, and like yeah, you know what I mean? Like they're putting new paint on fucking rubble buildings and shit and like trying to rebuild stuff, but it's like I don't know, I still picture it like
Well,
lacking the funds and shit to
well,
really
here's one of the
reconstruct
things.
it
Like a
all.
good example is you look at
Unless
like
it's mob
the
control. Yeah, I
slum
could see mobs
cities.
coming in and taking it.
Well, like one of the good examples, you look at I think favelas in like South America and Mexico, these complete shanty towns, but they you do see, so you see gardens, you see the
Right.
gangs and they act as sort of
Yeah.
the political entities of
Yeah, yeah,
those
they're keeping the
and
Mexican
keeping
mafia
people.
out and shit, you know?
Yeah, it's like there are different tiers of power, but people are still living in them, and I feel comfortable as I can,
Right, right.
like realizing like they're putting their trust in these gangs, but even though they're sort of either working for them or just sort of being bullied, but they can sort of live a semi-normal life almost.
Yeah.
And one thing about where I grew up in, it wasn't the combat zone in the cyberpunk sense. It wasn't the best area. We did have to dodge a few, when you hear something go pop, pop, pop. But you knew that the people who lived there were, for the most part, good people. There was only that small element that were bad. And unfortunately, they were so bad that even though they were a smaller number, they could control an entire area. It's like you can
Yeah.
hold off an entire crowd of people with a guy with a single gun with a single bullet because nobody wants to be the one catch that bullet.
Right.
Fear is a very powerful force multiplier.
Yeah.
But it's like one of the interesting things I always thought I really enjoyed about Cyberpunk 2020, what it did was the Home of the Brave and the Land of the Free books that came out, I think.
Love those.
Because you not only saw what Night City was in the world of Cyberpunk, it talked about all the cities, like a good chunk of the cities, the regions, and how they adapted and changed. So even if you never wanted to play Cyberpunk in Night City, you could play it in Ohio or
Right.
probably like Mississippi or one of these other cities that was still around, and it had a backstory to it.
Yeah.
And I
That's
think that
cool.
opened up a lot of doors for people to want to try it.
Exactly. I mean, even if they don't go into depth, and they don't go into depth about every city, but they give enough of the feel of the area, the region, as you say, that okay, we're going to play in Maryland, my state,
Yeah.
and we have enough here where we can mold something. We can, take it from Night City and bring it to Baltimore. And there's enough in those source books that you can do that.
Yeah. No, and
Yeah, I
the
think
other thing I really like is as far as environments and vibe and just setting a mood is like, uh, and it doesn't necessarily have to be combat zone. Of course, they're easily put there, but they can also be in some back room or hidden underground or something. Is like the night markets.
Oh yeah, those are
I
great.
love
And
the vibe of that shit.
they can spring up anywhere.
Yeah.
yeah, I think that the night markets there's a lot of influence from like from the Eastern Asian markets, and I think that bled over here really well. Like I haven't got a chance to visit any other ones in LA when I was living there, but I wish I had just to sort of feel that excitement.
Yeah. But no, I love in Cyberpunk how the night markets and midnight markets, step up a bigger, even more dangerous, maybe mob oriented version of a night market. But I love the vibe of it being like, a black market, flea market, if you will, like kind of underground illegal shit, but flea market vibe. I always picture it, obviously,
That's
because
how
they come and go, but like tents, booths, and shit like
that's how
that.
I always
What was that? Sorry.
no, that's how I always felt about it. It's like I just imagine myself in a flea market.
Yeah, like it's all
It's
tents
just
and booths and shit, and like everything's just shantily set up real quick because they break it down and take off when the night's over or whatever, But
Or they get raided.
right, no, but I love the vibe of that night markets and midnight markets and all that shit. Like it just has that great criminal vibe to where you can always slip in that slight touch of anxiety and danger, even though they're, the party's there just to shop maybe. Maybe it's an in-between thing, but it can always develop into something because there's always
oh, of
like
course.
dangerous fuckers there.
Yeah, it's a great place for player hooks to start plot hooks and such. It's like it's
Yeah.
a great in between.
No, especially like, and we've talked about this before, like when players want to get, and I've had it in my game where players want to get, extremely dangerous weapons or exotics or something, and it can always lead to like a nice little side mission like, oh, I can source that, but you got to go here, you got to do this, or talk to my boy over in this part of town this day. And like, you can always do fun shit with that and lead off into some side thing and see where it goes.
Well, I think in
Oh,
Red, that's probably going to be really important because everything is sort of so scarce now. It's not like it was in 2020 where you had corporations producing everything and then some.
Right.
Now the games have changed. It's like you want this kind of rifle. Well, you can get it. Finding ammo is a whole other story though because no one produces that anymore.
Yeah. No, I think, and speaking of Red, like I am so excited for that environment because, and we're starting, anybody listening, go to youtube.com/Mulligan Live this coming Tuesday and Wednesday. Weekly, we'll be running 2 teams, but I'm so excited to dive into Red because, you know, just like that, like I picture, everything kind of rising, hustle and bustle because of the construction and life getting back into the city, and everyone's cutthroat, the neocorps, everyone's just trying to get back into life and, claim their spot, But I picture it blanketed in this fucking red, filthy vibe, the skies, and it just has I don't know, like a slightly more dangerous vibe, and everything is scarce. So it's, everything within it has like a sub level of danger to it because, like you said, like you can't just run to the store and get something anymore, So everything just
And
has this
scarce,
other layer of fucking danger and adventure to it. It's just awesome.
right? Because scarcity adds another element. It's like when you can't find it, as you say, you're going to have to go out there and you're going to have to bust your ass, and you may have to deal with some people that you would not have normally had to deal with if you could just go to the mall and buy it yourself.
Right. And that's not to say, they're still rebuilding, uh, malls and shops and things. And they're rebuilding factories, corporations are rising up, and there is new stuff happening, but there's still a lot of shit that isn't. And there's still a lot of old tech and things that are missing. And like, nomads are still, they're running all the transportation. So shit is still dangerous to get from, one city to another or one factory to a different city or whatever. So it's still, even with the rise of new factories and new life and construction, like it's not going back to like Stone Age by any means, it's still fucking dark future and cybernetics and all that great shit. But within that, even the shit that's available is hard, or that's being made new, let alone not new, that scarcity of it is still difficult to get because, there's still that element of like a factory in some other city or town or out in a certain district, and it still has to get to you or to some other factory to be put with some other item to become the item you need to buy. And then it has to get transported to the few shops that'll sell it in your city. And you know what I mean? Like there's just so much more to it now, I feel.
Right, right, because there is no more Amazon Prime.
Right,
Exactly.
right.
This is the era of
Yeah,
mom and
speaking,
pop cyberware shops.
yeah, and you just tapped into it. There's no fucking internet. The whole net running thing, the internet, the data crash shit happened, and like that's a great thing to bring up. And I think that adds to it. So there's no level of connectivity on the internet. You don't have that feeling anymore. Like everything is a little more raw, even though it's future. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that there is an internet, but it is just so restricted to
Right.
the elite that it is just it doesn't almost exist anymore.
No,
It's
exactly.
like
Like
that.
there's been hint of that. Like you read about it and you've seen it like in some of the live play too that I've seen with Mike Pondsmith running a game and stuff. So I've picked up on these things and I can't wait till they elaborate in the full red release. But yeah, there still is like a rebuild of this net that's just kind of this exclusive high end, almost like a corp resource probably, but it is coming back. Everything's being rebuilt, and you see that clearly because look at what's going on in 2077. It's almost like Red was a great rebirth where it can get back to grimy and increase the danger and everything. Make it more cutthroat and fucked up. But then you have this great space from like 2045 up to 2077 where now it goes back into like extreme diversity. The skies are kind of clearing up a little. I mean, it's still polluted and fucked up, but they're not fully red. You know what I mean? And like, there's no more like sludge wash-offs and stuff. I imagine, and it's just technology has advanced that many more years. Look how nomads have evolved into a gang now. Like things have completely changed. But I picture 2077 like the environments are closer to
Actually,
sci-fi in my
hey
mind.
Rob, something about the nomads turning into the gangs. I was looking through the world book of the Jumpstart. They actually talk about that, some of the nomads breaking off and
Right.
becoming gangs. So
Yeah,
it
we
sort of does
mentioned
start up in red.
Yeah, we mentioned that in the timeline episode, I believe, but it wasn't fully like how it was described in that world book when we got to that section of it. Like when we got to that point, it was like full on. Um, it was like no, there. It seemed like there was no more like nomads. Like all nomads were just
Yeah,
back to like all of them are just different gangs, with the exception of that huge one. I forget the family name or whatever.
probably avocados.
That was it. But you know what I mean. So like, but anyways, my point is, I feel like environment wise, going into 2077, you're going back to that 2020 vibe, but with even newer tech and more modern shit. You know what I mean? Like, because face it, it's been that farther into the future, and that far from the rebuild that started during Red.
Yeah, it's just cyclic storytelling. It's like when one empire falls, you have that Dark Ages, and then you have the new era of the new empires.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'm
probably something will lead
thinking,
27/7 to fall down
yeah,
again.
could we consider red to be like the new industrial revolution? Everything's
Yeah.
collapsed and now we're just trying to build it back up again.
Totally. 100%.
Hmm.
Yeah. But I love the vibe of it. But as far as environments, out of all of these, when I picture 2020, like how the world is that there, or Night City, let's just get specific, the Night City area and surrounding wastelands and whatever. Um, and then I picture the environment in like vibes in red, with like the post-toxic fallouts and just the rebuilding and construction and neocorps rising and all that sort of turmoil going on, in the way that travel and internet is rebuilding and happening, or I don't know how to word it, but and then going into 2077, the vibe of that, which has that 2020 vibe, but even more into the future and more from the rebuild. And I picture even probably more diverse in the way that the drastic districts are and stuff. But we'll see, when it gets there. But just going by the art book, out of all of them, red is definitely my favorite. It seems the most like dangerous and filthy and just intense to me right now.
Yeah, I am very eager to see what it has to offer. Not only the core book, but the supplemental books. I
Yeah, yeah,
hear
no, no.
about
Strictly
from,
speaking,
from
environment and all that. Let's not get into rules, and everybody has preferences with that.
oh yeah,
We're
I'm
just
definitely not
strictly
a big
talking
rules
environments,
guy.
aesthetics, and vibe and shit.
Yeah.
What were you
Like
gonna
I would
say, Phil?
say,
What were
I'm
you
not
gonna
a
say,
big
Phil?
rules guy.
What was that, Phil? Sorry.
I'll say I'm not a big rules guy.
Oh,
The
oh,
rules are for me, secondary.
yeah, yeah,
yeah. For me, it's like going on what you're saying about how red is. I That makes me feel like it looks at it as like red is the cyberpunk version of like the Great Depression. You're gonna have these. That's
right.
that's really what it does feel
It
like to me. It's
is.
like, and I'm really excited to see what they're gonna do with it. Like I'm really want to get into that lore that Phil was talking about, and I'm really hoping that we get some more
Well,
of
I get
those like
to.
source books that really go into the rest of the world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I plan, I've got an interview set up with Jay from our Talsorian Games. We had some issues this just the other day. We were supposed to do it, but there was just so many connectivity issues and fucked up shit going on. I think it's the heat wave that's going on here in Cali. They're doing the rolling blackouts, and the internet connection has been fucked up on and off throughout the day. But we rescheduled it. So hopefully next Saturday it'll be smoother, and we'll be doing that interview. And that's definitely on the plate. We're gonna fucking dive into that and see how much info he can release, or at least talk about, when it comes to that, because I want to know, like, is there going to be obviously a new Night City source book, and court books released a new version of like what was Morgan Blackhand's like weapon book, or is there going to be like an elaborate Night City Midnight Market book that they're putting out? And that Black Chrome book that they've talked about putting out, is that going to be just like a Chrome 1 or 2 or 3 or 4? Or is it going to be like the ultimate Black Chrome book that's going to be like all of them combined with the old shit but revised to work in red in addition to new shit? And like, are they going to put out something to where you can translate and easily bring some 2020 stuff into it, or what's going to be compatible, and how are they handling that? Is there going to be a new map of Night City, obviously, that they're going to release with the red core book release stuff, or is that going to be a separate source book sort of thing? Or all these questions. I'm just excited about all that shit too. Is there anything I forgot with that? I just want to make sure, because when that interview happens, I want to make sure I ask them everything.
I think, no, I think that covered a
I think
lot
I
of it.
covered. Yeah. It's everything
Yeah,
we all want, and I'm sure they're gonna do it.
everything we
Like,
all
it's just
want.
gonna take
That
time.
entire interview is just going to need an NDA.
Right. It's gonna have
Like,
nothing. It's gonna be nothing but beeps and blacked out words and shit. Like, you're not really gonna get to listen to it.
It's all he's gonna be so redacted.
Yeah. No, but I think if we're tactful, like just like how they said with Red, they gave us an advanced copy of Red rule books, and like they said, use it. You can stream live with your players and everything. Just when you go over rules or talk about things, don't read it directly from the book or get into specifics. Don't release any of that because of the fact it's still beta. Things might change by the time they release it, and they're trying to protect their IP right now too. So I totally understand that. So I think I can be tactful enough with him during the interview to, go over these things or at least see if it's in the plans or in the works sooner or later, and some of uh, the general idea of them without diving into the details that steps on toes or presses on their
Good,
IP too much. You know what I mean?
good, good.
We got to put a lot of your points into social skills there, Rob.
Yeah. It's going to, and some luck
And
points
social
too.
skills are definitely important.
I need human perception. I need socializing conversation. I need a lot of luck points.
Hey, luck points are probably the one thing that kept most of my characters alive.
Yeah, I think it was on the last couple games that, or the last game that we ran when we were doing our 2020 Red Hybrid for your team and the other team. Everyone was just getting saved by luck on that last game. It seemed like it was really cool.
Yeah, luck plays a big role, and I'm so glad about it now.
Yeah. So hey, was there any other environments that we didn't go over that are kind of crucial to Cyberpunk that we should talk about? I mean, one thing I always love is, and especially with Red, I mean, but in 2022, like it rains a lot. I always, aside from like dirty, but I always picture it like nothing's ever really dry and nice unless it's an unusually really hot day, in which case it's like, I think Phil was talking about this with me earlier about being sweaty and the armor and shit like that.
The
Right,
horrible uncomfortableness.
right, because armor is hot and it's heavy, and even if you assume lighter weight materials, you're not going to be jogging around in that stuff all day getting into firefights because guess what? You're going to pass out.
Yeah,
Right. Or
I've
or
had to
or, or
carry that
after you
stuff in horrible places.
or after you do all that and then you try to walk into a diner or socialize or persuade somebody nice or whatever, like you got to remember you're probably there sweaty and grimy and have a little bit of BO and stuff if you haven't had time to clean up yet. So I think those details are kind of important in the environment. And it's definitely on a GM side, remembering these things and incorporating it into gameplay. But I think, more and more details matter when it comes to environment and shit like that. And I think that was a good point that you brought up, Phil, is because it's not just the environment around you, like the rain, the heat, and all that, but then directly incorporating it into like a player's persona at that moment, or their I don't want to say hygiene, but you know what I mean, like just
Yeah,
their being. You know what I mean? Like an environment can affect that, and then you gotta play that in.
exactly. Because,
That's really cool.
hey, as you say, I'm trying to be social and I smell like a sewer.
Right. Then you got to like
I
you
can
got to
put
you
some
got to
pluses and
negative
minuses.
you got to make sure you negative mod that roll, and tell them like, dude, you're kind of stinky right now, so you're getting like a -4 on this one, like, and they're like, all right, wait, I'm not gonna talk to you yet. Is there a nearby store? I'm gonna get some deodorant, or okay, there's some flowers. Let me rub that on me, or like, oh, quickly ask somebody for some gum for my breath, or like, they got to think about that shit a little.
And
Yeah,
that
doing a skill
actually
check to brush teeth.
Yeah, yeah, skill check.
that adds another layer of kind of realism to the game. It's like, oh, I've got to actually worry about how, well, not
You make
worry,
them
but I have to consider, what my character's breath smells like, or
Yeah, and you make them roll
does
for
he have
that shit.
BO?
You make them roll for that shit for brushing and flossing, and they crit fail, so now their gums are bleeding, and they get a -4 to all conversations.
Well,
Like, cause
2020 did a good job of that. They brought in the first time I ever saw wardrobe as a skill check.
yeah, yeah,
Yes, and I've actually used that, believe it or not. I will have my players, depending on where they're going, check and see if
oh
what
yeah,
they're wearing is appropriate for that place. And if it's not, they'll get negatives to whatever roles they're trying to, perform.
yep. No, I think those details matter, and again, that's like, it's cool because it takes the environment and doesn't just make it a cool vibe or aesthetic or something that helps make it more immersive or something the players can picture and feel, but it also becomes an interactive thing. It actually becomes part of the play when you have it affect, um, the players and what they're doing. I think that's really cool. You know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, are there any other environments other than me bringing up the rain? Any other sort of cool things that like you
Well,
always think about with Cyberpunk or Night City and shit?
I think an environment I think is always sort of hard to do is the orbital ones, like going into space.
Yeah, I've
I think
never
those are hard to
played.
do.
It's funny. I've
I have
never
not played
ran or
those
played
either.
with that sort of shit yet.
Yeah, because I feel like it's if you're gonna do a cyberpunk in space, it becomes just so hard
Sci-fi.
not to be sci-fi.
Yeah, yeah. I feel that
And
too.
I think probably the best recommendations, like I watched some of the expands, and I think that is sort of that sets
Yes.
a good foundation and Alta Carbon too of
Yeah, yeah.
doing cyberpunk in a like space type setting of like you have to break it down. Yeah, you may be in space, but you still have those tier classes. And 2020, I think even in the first few books, like one of them was based in space of the 2013 expansions.
Yep. The original one was called Near Orbit. The second one was called Deep Space because, they were pushing further out into the solar system. And they, again, as you mentioned, not Alter Carbon, but The Expanse. That for me feels so much like Cyberpunk in space. I mean, you've got magnetic boots because there is no artificial gravity unless you're in a spinning torus. But outside of that, you're just locked down in these magnetic boots to keep you from, bumping your head into things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was what like 20 like for 2020 and this timeline, like the orbitals, like the spacefarers, they've played such a big role of sort of shaping the governments, shaping everything. And I think Ponsmith was talking about it in the interview that like the Outriders, which are Red's new one or the new group that controls all the space travel, that's gonna be like one of the first three books released for the expansions. So I think that this outer space is gonna play a bigger role than it has for a while.
Yeah.
It has in the game, but I guess no one's actually, well, not no one. I know no one in my group has ever asked, "Hey, can we go out into space?" Because in all the years I've been running it, I have actually never taken my players into space, and I would actually like to.
Yeah, I've never done that either. It's never really interested me, but I think that, like Eric said, I think Pond Smith has hinted to some things with that. So I'm curious to see what kind of shit they're gonna drop in, and I could totally see them doing that because it would expand what they're doing so much. But I don't see it happening right away with Red. Um,
Oh no, no, because remember,
right.
the corporations are the ones who are in charge of getting you up there, and they've been pretty much,
Well, it's all cutthroat rebuilding and making sure that the ones that were there can stay there and compete with the neocorps that are cutthroat coming up, taking over.
Well, yeah, but I think in Red, the new faction, the Outriders, they're sort of separate from all the corps, but their ties are closest to the Nomads of like so it's a whole nother beast now with the space travel. And I think we lost Phil.
Yeah, I think we did. Um, but yeah, well, I was gonna wrap up here anyways in a minute.
He's back.
I think we covered pretty much all the environments and stuff, and I think, when it comes to the space environment, that's one we're gonna have to
so I
wait and
got
see.
disconnected.
We're gonna have to wait and see, kind of how that plays out and how they describe it. But I have a feeling that's gonna take a back burner at least during the initiation of Red and what's going on, just because of
Oh,
how disruptive the society and corporations and life is during Red. I think it's going to take a while, but but yeah, I think we covered all the fucking vibes and parts of the city and the general cyberpunk, night city, dark dystopian, futuristic, high tech, low life environments. I think we covered all of them. Did we miss anything else?
I,
Any last words that we need to punch in there for the
I don't
environments?
I don't think we missed anything. I mean, there's possibilities, but I don't think we missed anything. How about you, Eric? You think we missed anything?
The only thing I can think of, which would probably make an entire podcast on its own, is like actual battlefields in the cyberpunk world. But I think that's a whole nother subject we could do an entire conversation on.
Yeah, no, definitely, and Battlefield is just really that can be taken into any environment, honestly. So, that's its own beast, I guess, in itself.
Yeah.
That's not real, I think we covered as far as environment, aesthetics, and vibes and all that stuff. I think we covered, all of them. If we missed anything, anybody listening, please comment, send us a message, let us know. That'd be awesome. And also, please consider sharing this podcast. Go to youtube.com/Mulligan Live and subscribe. We do, weekly live gameplay there. Join the Cyberpunk Uncensored group on Facebook. Instagram, like the fan page. Just try to show us some love. We're doing the podcast and the games and all this shit because we have a serious passion for Cyberpunk. We love this shit. So, we're going to do it no matter what, but we would really appreciate the support. We're trying to build up the community. We want more players, more GMs, more content. We just want more Cyberpunk. So if you feel the same way, please show us some love. We would really appreciate that. Any last words, guys?
I can't wait
Yeah.
till the next session.
Well, I am eager to get all the Cyberpunk fans to come on over to our side. And what I'm hoping is that 2077 introduces more people to Cyberpunk and we can draw them back onto the tabletop.
Oh, yeah. No, I believe that is going to happen. I mean, obviously not widespread because a lot of people into video games maybe won't cross over to tabletop, but I think there is definitely going to be a percentage of people that love the open world aspect of the game because that's what is making that shit so popular. It's that open world vibe. And I think a lot of those people are going to realize, like, holy shit, like the role playing game, the tabletop, like that's the ultimate open world. There is no fucking limitation. So I think it will. I think it will most definitely help get us more players, more GMs, and just more. Everything's just starting to grow and really starting to blow up again. I love it. So yeah, just positive vibes with all that and hopeful thinking. Let's all hope that it just keeps going.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody listening, like I said, show us some love. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Take care, everyone.